For nearly 3 decades, a literal wall divided Berlin into two, a tall, cold, and cruel beacon of communism. But then, almost overnight, it was gone. To understand why this wall was built, let's go back a bit in history. In 1945, the Second World War ended in devastation. Nazi Germany had surrendered, and the once mighty city of Berlin lay in ruins. The Allies, America, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, divided Germany into 4 zones, each administered by its respective occupying forces. Berlin, although deep inside the Soviet zone, was also split among the victors. This was initially meant to be a temporary measure, a shared responsibility to ensure the slow but complete denazification of Germany. The Western Allies, especially the United States, wanted a democratic Germany rebuilt with capitalist institutions, a free market, open trade, and a democratic society. But the Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, had a very different vision. Relations between the Soviets and the Western powers were strained by the ideological differences, and an armed conflict was brewing. They wanted control over Eastern Europe and envisioned a communist East Germany that would act as a buffer against the West. Germany, and especially Berlin, became the first battleground of a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. By 1949, this division became permanent. 2 Germanys were born, the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, supported by the West, and the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, under Soviet influence. Berlin, though technically within East Germany, was still divided. West Berlin became an island of capitalism, a bright outpost of Western values, surrounded by a sea of communism. East Berlin, on the other hand, was gloomy and tightly controlled with shortages, propaganda, and state surveillance. While all this happened, East Germans were banned from leaving the country, but it was still quite easy to literally walk from East to West Berlin, and vice versa. However, life in East Berlin was visibly different from that in democratic West Berlin and West Germany by extension. The US and its allies, desperate to avoid a repeat of the repercussions of the harsh Treaty of the Versailles after the First World War, poured money and resources into reconstructing Western Germany. The Soviets, however, demanded more and more money from East Germany as war reparations, which further crushed the already weak economy. Citizens were being monitored by the Stasi, a communist form of the Gestapo, who reported back to Moscow any hint of disloyalty to Stalin. Education was free, as well as housing, but quality of life was still low, and this imbalance led to a crisis. Between 1949 and 1961, more than 3 million East Germans ran away to the West, many of them young, educated, and skilled. Most escaped through the Berlin loophole by walking or taking a bus into the western part of Berlin. From there, they'd catch a flight out of Berlin and leave the communist world for good. This led to massive brain drain, siphoning away the intellectual capital of East Germany. The East German regime was bleeding its future, and the Soviets feared total collapse. So they acted. In the early hours of August 13th, 1961, while the city slept, East German soldiers and police began sealing the border between East and West Berlin. Streets were blocked, railways shut down, barricades rolled out overnight, families were split apart, workers couldn't get to their jobs, students were cut off from their schools, no warning, no mercy. The anti-fascist protection rampart, as the East called it, was not to keep enemies out, but to keep its own people in. At first, it was just barbed wire and mesh, but when people started jumping the wires and leaping over from windows, the concrete started pouring. The tops of the walls were lined with smooth metal pipes to prevent climbing. Watchtowers went up. Guard dogs were deployed. Strips of metal spikes and even landmines were planted all over the ground. A no-man's land was created, a 100-metre deadly zone called the Death Strip. There were no buildings within this zone, and the ground was made completely sandy to reduce running speed. Bunkers were built. Hundreds of guards were deployed around the clock, with orders to shoot crossers on sight. Over time, the wall stretched 96 miles, wrapped around West Berlin like a cage. This began the age of the Berlin Wall. Every East German who had dreamed of freedom now stared at a fortress lined with soldiers and machine guns. Escape became a matter of life and death. Some people dug tunnels under the wall, narrow, dark, and dangerous. Others made fake passports. A few brave souls even built homemade hot air balloons. Some swam icy rivers or drove high-speed cars through checkpoints. One person even reportedly drove a stolen tank right through the wall. Roughly 5,000 people succeeded in escaping between 1969 and 1989, but many did not. At least 140 people were killed trying to cross the wall. Some were shot, others bled to death in the Death Strip, while West Berliners watched helplessly from the other side. Perhaps the most iconic moment came in 1961, a few days after the wall went up. A young East German border guard, Konrad Schumann, was stationed near the barbed wire. As photographers looked on, he suddenly dropped his weapon and leapt over the wire into West Berlin. While East Berlin was shrouded in secrecy and silence, West Berlin became a beacon of resistance. The wall itself became a canvas, covered in graffiti, art, and protest messages. On the eastern side, however, it remained blank, cold, and heavily patrolled. Eventually, family visits were allowed, but the process was intentionally made arduous and expensive to discourage applicants. The West intensified its efforts to campaign for freedom for East Germany. In 1963, US President John F. Kennedy visited before the wall, declaring in German, "I am a Berliner." His message was clear. America would not abandon Berlin. It was a promise of solidarity. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan stood before the Brandenburg Gate and delivered a speech that echoed around the world.
Behind me stands a wall that encircles the free sectors of this city, part of a vast system of barriers that divides the entire continent of Europe. From the Baltic south, those barriers cut across Germany in a gash of barbed wire, concrete, dog runs, and guard towers. Farther south, there may be no visible, no obvious wall, but there remain armed guards and checkpoints all the same. Still a restriction on the right to travel.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall! But at the time, it seemed unlikely that it would actually happen. The Soviet Union still controlled the East. The wall seemed eternal. Then came the 1980s. With the Eastern Bloc slowly crumbling, East Germans started protesting, demanding free travel and democracy, and world leaders took notice. The Soviet Union was collapsing under economic strain. Mikhail Gorbachev, the new Soviet leader, introduced certain reforms to combat this: glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. These changes shook the Eastern Bloc. In Poland, the Solidarity movement grew. In Hungary, reforms began. In Czechoslovakia, intellectuals spoke up. And in East Germany, people took to the streets. Mass protests erupted. In Leipzig, hundreds of thousands marched peacefully, chanting, "Wir sind das Volk," we are the people. The East German regime struggled to contain the dissent. The Stasi, once feared, was overwhelmed. The people had found their voice. Then came a fateful evening, November 9th, 1989. Mikhail Gorbachev decided to diffuse tension by making it easier for people to obtain travel permits. That afternoon, Günter Schabowski, a senior East German official, held a press conference. He had just received a note about new travel regulations. He didn't read the note properly, and he had no time to prepare his speech. When asked by reporters when the border would open, Schabowski, flustered and unprepared, said, "As far as I know, effective immediately." That was a mistake. But the fuse had been lit. Those words spread like wildfire. By nightfall, thousands of East Berliners rushed to the border checkpoints. The guards, unprepared and without orders, panicked. Then they made a historic choice. They opened the gates. Crowds surged through. People screamed, hugged, cried. West Berliners greeted them with champagne. Strangers danced on the wall. Young people climbed it, hammered at it. In hours, what once symbolized division became a celebration of unity. No one had expected it, not world leaders, not even the East German government. The wall had not fallen with force, but with joy. Within a year, on October 3rd, 1990, Germany was officially reunified. The Cold War had ended. The Iron Curtain had lifted. Today, only fragments of the Berlin Wall remain. Some are preserved as memorials. Others stand in museums around the world. Tourists visit the East Side Gallery in Berlin, where murals now speak of peace, resistance, and remembrance. The Berlin Wall reminds us of what happens when fear rules over freedom. When governments turn walls against their own people. But more importantly, it shows us the power that people have when they refuse to accept oppression. The wall stood for 28 years. It took just one night to bring it down, because no wall is stronger than the human spirit. Thank you for watching this story of resistance, division, and ultimately of reunion. If this history spoke to you, share it, teach it, keep it alive. Subscribe for more real stories from the past that still shape our world today.